So similar to Mike Runaway, I never really made an updated video on Molten MCI Alter S. I just kind of dropped a lot of ideas and concepts throughout the various videos, and there really isn't an updated take of Molten MCI on this channel or Alter S. To briefly summarize how I feel about Molten MCI now, I do think it's the best option in quotes, even if it still does have some annoying quirks that aren't elaborated on very well. With all that said, I think it's good enough to run with for something like a video like this. Okay, so to clarify, the very first original concept of Molten MCI Alter S was that the Vengeful Spirit wasn't part of Molten Freddy. That sort of branched off into Golden Freddy not being a part of Molten Freddy, since that was something I was talking about a lot in that original video, which itself is like part 3 of a separate set of videos. There's a reason this is getting its own video now. I'm going to stray a little bit from the initial premise of the Vengeful Spirit, and I want to focus more on the neutral side of Golden Freddy, regardless of what Cassidy is, or who Andrew is, or anything like that. Because I realize there's a lot of interesting stuff to work with specifically with Golden Freddy in general, not even tied to any one spirit. Not to mention, there's an entire game coming out that can completely recontextualize our understanding of the series and what characters are where and when or what. I feel like most people already know what Molten MCI Classic was. Molten Missing Children's Incident. It's the idea that William takes the classic animatronics for parts and melts them down into remnant that will be used for the fun times. One of my biggest original problems with Molten MCI was why? I mean, sure, if he automatically knew how everything worked, that's not really much of a problem, but how he gets to that point, how he understands why everything worked, bothered me. That wasn't until I went on a bit of a journey of learning new theories and ideas that could help explain and connect things, including ones I hadn't really seen associated with Molten MCI at all before. So here's a version of Molten MCI that expands on how we get to this point in particular. Let's start with Charlie's death. Given that William does nothing to Charlie's body, or doesn't put the security puppet near Charlie intentionally, in fact he drives off before the puppet even leaves the building, it doesn't seem like his goal from the start was possession, or at least he wasn't being very careful. This was clearly something more spontaneous regardless of what he was trying to do with it. In contrast, I think the MCI is the start of William's first attempts to try and figure out what happened with Charlie. Regardless of whether William stuffed the kids or the puppet stuffed the kids, he has reason to understand that there is a magic puppet flying around that is clearly haunted. Now he has to figure out what caused the haunting, and conveniently, said haunting was around the time he kills Charlie. So no matter why he kills the kids or what he does with the bodies, he has some initial setup here to try and figure out what do. And after the animatronics start walking around, he now knows for a fact that more kids killed in a restaurant can equal more things possessed. This is part of the setup of why FNaF 2 becomes weirdly important to Molten MCI. It gives a lot of connective tissue for why William gets where he does and when he does. Okay, so one of the first details that makes this story arc a little interesting is that William has to pretend to be a night guard at all in the events of FNaF 2. For some reason, he doesn't just walk in as William Afton, owner of the company or co-founder or whatever he is. I don't know if he was outright fired after the events of the MCI, or maybe he only really had tied to Fredbear's and just has loose, creative credit or tie to the company after that. I don't really know why William just doesn't use his authoritative power to walk in there, but it seems like that's what we're going for the story. For whatever reason, he has to pretend to be someone else to get his way in there. At some point in his time there, he obviously commits Save Them, the minigame where he kills at minimum 5 new kids and just leaves them straddled around the building. And Mangle in this minigame is really important. The sprite/event, I don't really know how Click Team works for these kind of things, is named He Was Here. I made a whole mini theory about this before, so this is kind of going to be a recap. It's always been a bit of an oddity in FNaF 2 that little kids were able to rip apart Foxy so consistently at the new restaurant. In fact, it's something that happens so frequently the engineers gave up and tried to make it a new gimmick in the take apart and put back together attraction. I do think this must have happened once or twice, but think about what Phone Guy says earlier in the game.
Those are from the previous location, and we just use them for parts now.
And also think about the very second ever teaser we got for the game. Something borrowed, something new. Whenever they have to fix the new animatronics, they have to use the old animatronic parts. Those old animatronic parts are haunted, which is why the new animatronics at bare minimum seem to be active maybe prior to Save Them. And Mangle is already mangled prior to Save Them, which also means whatever was going on with Mangle was something already a consistent problem as of the minigame. We also know that William is obviously the night guard and later the day guard, so he should know pretty much everything there is about what's going on in the restaurant. In fact, he's specifically the one to point out for the first time that the animatronics are moving around in that location. So what if he started seeing the new animatronics moving when they got new parts from the originals, and started connecting the dots. Well, what do you do from there? Well, you push the experiment further. Take one of them who's the furthest away from the others and is already somewhat damaged, and just keep breaking it so the employees have to keep putting it back together more and more parts from the original animatronics. This explains so many of Mangle's personal oddities that the others don't have. I mean, think of what animatronics are able to move in the events of Save Them. Freddy, who the very first game established was clearly smarter or more methodical than the others, waiting until the power is either out or just never walking back to the original stage in the events of the game. And he's the main guy, he's Freddy Fazbear. The Puppet, who is stated to be very aware in Ultimate Custom Night and in general is just the smartest character in this game as at this point in the series. And Golden Freddy, who is Golden Freddy, but also Mangle is there, implying there's something a little bit more distinct about Mangle from these other characters in the point that they can still move and save them. If they've just been hauling and smashing and slamming new parts into this robot over and over again, then it's pretty obvious why Mangle would be more active than the others. It also explains one thing that AR brought up, which was how the modern recreation of Mangle they made to tie into the original stories of the original Mangle couldn't do what that original Mangle was capable of. The new one can't actually crawl on the ceiling or any of the fantastical feats of the original, which implies that's a supernatural ability, not just a basic, oh, it somehow figured out how to get onto the walls. And I think that might be the reason that Sister Location picked the theming that it did. What is the title of Williams' animatronic line? The Funtime Animatronics. Animatronics, specifically with a white and pink color scheme, and Mangle's completed form in FNaF World and later on merch, is titled Funtime Boxing. Mangle is the moment where William finally cracks Remnant as a concept. The idea of transferring something from the old endoskeletons to new ones. It's what worked. That said, I don't think that's the only thing he figured out in the events of Save Them. Once again, I'm trying to avoid puppet stuff versus Will stuff debates for the sake of this video. I guess under Will stuff you could argue he just left the bodies around to see if you didn't need to actually put them in robots, maybe. And with puppet stuff, he might just not understand at this very moment that you need to stuff kids yet, and is seeing what happens when you just leave them around. Maybe he did that originally, that's a whole separate debate. Point is, he now has cracked that, hey, if you just leave a ton of bodies around, that's not going to cause possession to just happen. There needs to be some level of proximity and connection between the suits and characters and the souls that will now possess them. Between his next set of murders and Mangle, he now has a pretty clear idea of what goes where. That said, after he's fired in the events of the game, and the company has the policy that no terminated employees can return, it means he can't come back to FNaF 1's location once it opens up, at least while it's active and running and there's night guards like Mike or Phone Guy or anyone else who was there still active in the building monitoring everything. This could be the reason he creates Sister Location. He still has all the money and funding he needs to make his own pizzeria, but he doesn't have access to the original possessed suits anymore because he's not allowed back there. He has to start from scratch, and why not start from scratch with a better, bigger plan that's more ambitious and more automated? Who needs the old victims to experiment with when you can make new victims? The Funtimes and the Scooper are basically the culmination of everything William had figured out up to this point. However, it might have been too automated. Now, I don't know if the intent was that William successfully got other victims other than Elizabeth or not, even though I've theorized that he might have at least gotten one before. For the sake of this video, I don't think it really matters as much. Maybe he doesn't, maybe he does. We know Freddy's 1 is a crumbling, rotting building that didn't do very well, and thus once it's closed down, there's no night guards there to watch anything. There's no one really left to get in his way from just walking in and taking the old animatronics like he originally kind of was doing in FNaF 2. This might be a better in-universe explanation for why the Funtimes are set up to have so many killing features that don't really get used in the base game, because maybe he just didn't need to use them once Freddy's closed. I mean, we do know the rental service opens pretty close to the events of Pizza World, because in the closure of Pizza World, it stated that, oh, look out for baby at a local party near you, in the source code of one of the teasers, which implies the rental service was born shortly after, and in the rental service, we're told that it opened right after the closure of Freddy's. So, point A to point B, timeline's pretty short. You don't need to kidnap and kill kids if you have your original suits. What could go wrong? And I feel like that explains William's storyline a little bit better than just, oh, he goes back for the classics for more Remnant, which I feel like is how it's often sort of hand-waved when it is a weird decision. If your goal was to get Remnant from the classics from the start, why not start with that? If your goal was to kidnap and kill more children from the start, why ever go back to the original location? If it was opportunity based, I can't go back to the original building, so I have to do something new, and then I get the ability to go back to the original building, then I will go back to the original building. I mean, I presume that William would continue to have the fun times kill kids if he wasn't spring locked. It's just that without him, they don't really get to continue that work. Or at least that hasn't really been emphasized to us. Now onto the Alt-S version of Molten MCI. Alt-S in this context would basically be that William wasn't successful in acquiring Golden Freddy for this project. I mean, if I was a magic ghost bear capable of causing magic floating ghost head total organ failure or whatever the hell was going on in FNaF 2, I don't think I would be that easily put down, even if I wasn't some emissary of hate or vengeance like the Vengeful Spirit was. And let's say I didn't get destroyed. And now let's say my friends kind of just vanished or went away or did whatever happened here. Like, this is such a weird moment in the series in general. If I wasn't taken, where do I go now? That to me, I think, is the easier angle to understand Alt-S from beyond the Vengeful Spirit hunting down William angle. Even if Cassidy wasn't interested in vengeance, they could still be looking for their friends. It's worth noting said kids/friends of Golden Freddy are now like half a mile, maybe more, underground in this complicated labyrinth with cameras everywhere. I just don't think it would be that easy to find them after the events of FNaF 3. And the only real lead and person who has access to that bunker that Cassidy/Golden Freddy would know of at this point is right there with William. He's the only person who could potentially lead Cassidy back to that bunker to find their friends. Then regardless of where Cassidy or Golden Freddy's storyline goes from there, if they're following William, that will take them to FNaF 6, where insert ending happens. Cassidy receive revengeful Cassidy, UCN descend, etc., who cares? Okay, that's kind of getting ahead of myself, so let's focus on why I think this. Okay, so weirdly enough, the first piece of evidence that kind of points to this is the fact that in Ennard's level on Help Wanted, we can find 4 endoskeletons in the furnace. This was a recent discovery that made its rounds on Reddit, but what's interesting is that it's 4 instead of 5. Now, it's obvious to tie the endoskeletons to Molten MCI. It's like, oh, okay, the endoskeletons are being burned down, it's like we melted down for the remnant, yada yada, we all know that. In fact, it's not only that we don't have a Springlock endoskeleton, it's 4 generic FNaF 1-esque endoskeletons without anything to even represent Golden Freddy here. This can't really be the sister location endos because they don't look anything like this, and in the gallery, this is listed as a FNaF 1/Endo01 style endo. So unless there's an explanation that goes beyond Molten MCI to why there would be 4 endos in there, kind of has to point to that, but then if it is pointing to that, where is Golden Freddy, you know? And the more you think about Molten MCI with the context of Golden Freddy not being in the furnace, it makes you wonder more and more where it actually is. Because there's no parts left behind for it in FNaF 1 at all. That's really weird because William dismantles and leaves the costumes or shells behind of most of the characters, but not Golden Freddy, but also we don't see Golden Freddy anywhere, and we've seen the sister location bunker several times now. We've seen it in the original game, obviously, we've seen it in Help Wanted 1, and now in Help Wanted 2. We also saw it in Room for One More and in Dittophobia, and none of them ever mentioned Golden Freddy being around anywhere. It's a pretty noticeable absence in a theory that clings to the idea that Golden Freddy had to be physically entirely taken with nothing left behind. Because that's really the only explanation to why there would be nothing left behind in FNaF 1. So not only do we have a missing endoskeleton in the furnace, we have a missing entire character everywhere else. I'd also raise that this might imply some potential plot holes with how Fazbear Frights had the whole soul mechanics work. In Fazbear Frights, it's established through Jake and Andrew that 2 souls or entities in a close space or proximity or shared vessel can track down or kind of soul link, mind search, whatever you would want to call it, where one other vessel's thing had been split apart across multiple proxies. I know it's super confusing, but what that means basically is Andrew's agony and soul was split across a ton of stuff. One of those things included the battery pack from Fetch that made its way into the Stitch Wraith, and Jake was able to use that fragment to track down other fragments of Andrew. And see, this is interesting to consider when there's another mechanic in the novels that specifically would connect to Cassidy. Michael Brooks, the Golden Freddy of the original novel trilogy, even when split apart and messed up in his amalgam, I'll get into that later, is still aware of himself and fully conscious. And later, the other kids are helped so that they become fully conscious. When William asks Funtime Foxy to bring a boy to him, Susie then responds, "I have to go do something for him." Remember, at this point in time, she's under the impression that William is Spring Bonnie and is still her friend. At this point in time, Susie is split across 3 vessels, including 1 literal chunk of the metal from the molten amalgam that has been injected into Carlton, and is still treated as one coherent character across all of them. When one fragment knows something, they all do. Now, that doesn't mean soul splitting is flawless or has no complications to it. There is a consistent plot point that the more split up, the more things you forget and the harder it is to recall who you were. Andrew being the easiest example, where he just doesn't remember a lot other than the fact that William killed him and that he really hated William. Carlton and Michael Brooks have to work together to help the kids remember who they were and what was going on, even before Carlton reminds them that William is the killer. And that part is, to me, the best justification of why the MCI kids would attack Michael after springtrapping William. If one group of them did that, they should all remember that happened. However, after being taken apart and put back together so many times by the Scooper, a process that we know is automated from Sister Location Night 4 as well as a few other dialogue bits, they would slowly be degraded and remember less and less over time. By the events of Sister Location, they very well may not remember that they actually did kill William and he's springtrapped, just that somewhere out there their killer is still active. While that totally works for the main 4 MCI kids, when you have Cassidy in the logbook interacting with Michael, it becomes hard to justify and borders on a plot hole. If the order of events was we kill anyone who we think could be William in FNaF 1 prior, then they get revenge on William, then the Scooper takes them apart a bunch of times over an extended period of time and they slowly forget who they were and who William was, and thus their scattered minds mistake Mike for William, hence wanting to kill him, and then the logbook representing events seemingly after Sister Location, where Cassidy knows who Mike is and is not trying to kill him. If Cassidy was part of the amalgam, they could just explain to the other kids or put them back together, similar to how Michael Brooks did, to help them remember who's who and where's where. And if this event happens anywhere, it's in Happiest Day, when the souls move on, and obviously Happiest Day hasn't happened yet because their souls haven't moved on until presumably after 6. I mean, they're still around in Molten Freddy, if it ever happens. Now you might argue, oh, well then this is all just happening before actual Happiest Day, and then Happiest Day happens in FNaF 6. However, Charlie can repeatedly enter and leave Happiest Day as it's being completed. Happiest Day is active all nights in FNaF 3. You can enter at any time. It's actually how you can tell you're making progress is by seeing new kids enter the minigame across the game. Well, this could just be previous game weirdness where it was meant to end at 3 and that's been changed. It implies that whenever Happiest Day is happening, it's a point in time where the puppet is around, and the only time in the modern lore is in FNaF 6. So either Happiest Day is just retconned in this very specific way, or there's something wrong with how the novel explanation works in the game timeline, or for whatever reason, these minigames can't happen yet. This becomes another advantage of Alter S over normal Molten MCI. If Cassidy had any interest doing what Michael Brooks was doing in the games, then the only thing that we could even compare to being putting back to other people together is in the last minutes of the series. You can't even make this an excuse about like the bite victim or something like that. Regardless of what the bite victim is or where, he is something that Cassidy is able to interact with in the logbook. So unless he was somehow removed from the equation, once again, there's no reason for these events to not just happen. So it goes from a plot contrivance to I literally am not around these people so I cannot help them until something changes. Keeping Cassidy and Molten Freddy separate keeps Molten Freddy angry and violent and aimless, not remembering who's who or what's what. This allows for more conflict to happen in something like FNaF 6. One of the common complaints I see with Alter S is that Michael Brooks was part of the amalgam in the novels, therefore Cassidy must be part of the amalgam in the games. However, the novels and games are just going for a different story here. In the novels, it's not about luring all separate characters to one location for one big burn bonfire. There is no Henry plan, there is no pizza place, there is no Fazbear's Fright. A lot of the history is cut down and a lot of the characters and locations are streamlined and pushed together. And it makes sense to cut it down in the context of the novel. If we're not doing the puppet and we've basically just introduced Elizabeth for the sake of this plotline, and we're taking all this time to do the whole Charlie Bot plotline and set up the new location itself, there's really not a lot of time without doing a whole other book to add in all of the parts where they would be scattered and split apart. And if you're not going to do the plot beats where they're all split apart, why split them apart in the first place? And if we are trying to make everything one-to-one, rule-to-rule, then we get narrative inconsistencies when trying to drag that logic into the games. The Cassidy who helps the bite victim in the logbook just doesn't do that for the other MCI kids, despite seemingly being sentient. So you might think, what's the big whoop? That just means Cassidy helps the bite victim first and then moves on to the main MCI kids or something like that. And without Charlie, there's just a limit to what they can really do. They just need Charlie to finish the process of helping everyone move on. However, that becomes tricky with one of Michael's dialogue lines. In the logbook, he says, "Everything about this place is crazy and no one seems to notice except me," implying that whatever time frame the logbook is supposed to be representing is one where Michael is actively working a position. Given the constant splash cards and the fact that we're after sister location and the insanely tongue-in-cheek nature of the entire book referencing a lot of stuff that an actual Freddy's location probably wouldn't reference, I've personally bet on the logbook occurring around the events of FNaF 3. Problem is, if Cassidy and the Bite Victim were tied to Molten Freddy in FNaF 3, and interacting with Michael somehow there, not only do we not see Molten Freddy around there, or a retroactive depiction of him there, or a drawing of Molten Freddy, or even just a reference of like, oh, that metal creature around there in the book, or something like that. But given the fact that both William and Charlie are in the building, you would think all of the events could just happen then and there, that moment. Bite Victim gets put back together, Charlie's there to help the kids, and also they're all there to kill William. Hell, despite Andrew in the Frights books hating after him with a passion, Jake was still able to free him well before the agony actually died. So we don't even need William to be in this equation. Just Charlie and Molten Freddy being there, assuming Cassidy is in Molten Freddy, would mean we would have every single part of the puzzle there. So once again, either you have to cut out a certain random chunk of the logbook and pass it off as non-canon, or there is some external factor occurring in the logbook preventing these events from happening. And I really do want to stand by that the logbook does represent some sort of canonical event in time. Often a lot of random pages and quotes are taken as too meta to exist in the continuity, or at least has to be partially non-canon. However, Help Wanted pulls off many references, including specific character movement patterns that are not mentioned by phone guys, and also other spot-on details that really can't be known by people in the universe, including Nightmare Fredbear's existence. Nightmare Fredbear only seems to exist in actual nightmares. He is not on the sister location map, nor is he in Dittophobia. However, Mike does draw him and acknowledge him as one of his nightmares, meaning either Help Wanted is too meta as it references a character that no one can possibly know about exactly, or maybe perhaps someone got a hold of Mike's logbook, which is the whole setup of the book, that the book is being passed on to other people, and this information is now transferred to Fazbear Entertainment of the modern day. So either Fazbear Entertainment just perfectly guessed what Nightmare Fredbear looked like almost exactly, or they had some sort of drawing or reference. I mean, Mike is dead at this point in time, so he couldn't have just made one for them or been on the modeling staff. And obviously, why would he? So they have to somehow get an image of this character from some or something to go off of. And the only canon drawing of it we know of was the one in the logbook. The things in it, including the drawings, seem to have some actual existence or weight to them. At the bare minimum, we could treat this as a FNaF World situation where at the very least the clock ending is canon or has lore in it. And the lore in it is that Cassidy is aware of Michael's existence, and that we are after sister location, and we are in some other location. Put those all together and you have a Cassidy in Fazbear's Fright. And if they were a part of Molten Freddy, you have a Molten Freddy in Fazbear's Fright, meaning you have everyone together except for Baby. And thus I'm going to theorize with this concept in mind. Maybe this was moved past, or maybe this was an oversight in the narrative, but I am not going to assume that until it's confirmed. And I know it's really easy to jump to, oh, that must just mean that Michael has the same logic as Carlton, where he has a bit of remnant from the classics, and that's what the Cassidy is. Except that makes the plot hole even worse. Just as with Andrew being a tracking beacon for other things as Agony had infected, the part of Cassidy that's in Michael would be a living tracking beacon for Molten Freddy to find him, meaning if Molten Freddy had any ill intent towards him, they could pretty much track him down and kill him any time. It also means in FNaF 6, they have no reason to be fooled by Michael's existence. Even if they didn't know who they were attacking to the very last moment, they should have a chunk of their existence attached to this person in this room that they should feel and know is there. Not to mention, it's just kind of Golden Freddy's thing to be separate from the main group. In Give Gifts, Give Life, they're the only character not to get a mask placed on them. They also appear in the center of the group instead of the corners, and also jump scare the screen. They aren't dismantled on screen and Follow Me. They're in the background of the shot with all 4 masks at the end of FNaF 3. Their gravestone is covered up. In FNaF 1, they're the only character who can't be toggled in the custom night screen, as well as just being the most unique character in that game as a whole. They're also pretty unique in FNaF 2, being the only character who can jump scare you both from the hall as well as in your office, while also not, to my knowledge, appearing on the camera in any way. Fredbear's the final boss of FNaF 4 and also has all 4 characters' mechanics basically. Golden Freddy has every character's mechanic in FNaF AR. Of the MCI kids, they're the only Springlock suit. They're also the only non-essential cast member. All of the other 4 were meant to be active animatronics just functioning normally in the pizzeria, While Fredbear had been pushed to the sidelines and was no longer the main star of the company, and also outright was banned at a certain point once the Springlock suits were put away. They're the only character who can't be death-coined in Ultimate Custom Night. They have a unique, entire, dedicated cutscene to themselves. And depending on how you interpret Happiest Day, Golden Freddy / Fredbear is the character furthest away from everyone else and is always there perpetually on every single night, no matter what you do, as long as you enter Happiest Day. And also, unlike the other Happiest Day minigames, the actual main minigame itself has no setup in FNaF World. You set up helping the other kids in that game, implying there's something different about whoever this kid is from the other four, with the only other context being that Charlie can also be there regardless of whatever's happening. While that doesn't inherently mean Golden Freddy has to be unique in every instance, it would definitely be on brand if there was supporting evidence, which I feel there is. A point I've seen raised against Alteress was that Henry says William lured them all back, all being all 5 missing kids. However, as I mentioned in a YouTube short, I'm not sure if Henry understands Golden Freddy the way we do. I guarantee he knows there was 5 kids lured to the back room and killed, and I guarantee he understands that Fredbear the character exists, but he never acknowledges Golden Freddy individually. The only time he would ever acknowledge him is in this blanket sweeping statement. While it's questionable how literal the minigames we see in FNAF 6's ending are, Give Gifts, Give Life is altered to not include Golden Freddy in his explanation of it. Not to mention, how do you lure Golden Freddy to the safe room? It's specifically, he lured them all back. Golden Freddy teleports, it doesn't just walk. And also, if anywhere, it would be in the safe room. However, despite William leaving the parts behind of all of them, he doesn't do it for Golden Freddy. Which means not only is it questionable that he could be lured in the first place, because A, he should already be in the room, B, he should teleport so there shouldn't be any footage of him going anywhere, he should just be in point A to point B, and C, there's no parts left behind for him at all. We don't know how the footage would work. We don't know why there would be footage. There really should be footage because the safe room shouldn't be recorded. It isn't on cameras. We don't really know how he would know. To make this a real counterpoint, we just have to assume, without currently confirmation, that Henry knows for a fact Golden Freddy exists. Now, another point I've seen raised against Alteress, but I actually think might potentially play into the favor of it, depending on how you look at it, this is honestly one of the trickier points in general, is the orphan story. Candy Cat's orphan story covers a man who ultimately adopts 5 children after bringing them toys and gladness every day, because he is afraid that if they get adopted to homes, a burglar might go out and kill them individually. So instead, he just adopts all of them and brings them to his home, and ultimately the burglar chooses his home to rob and ends up killing the 5 children. The old man can't afford a coffin, so he stitches them all together to make one, and then buries the child. Then later that night, there's a knock on his door. Thing is, this is a really awkward story to fit anywhere into the series. A common interpretation is that the man is Henry or represents Henry, and that he is adopting the 5 kids by making the pizzeria, which brings them all to one place, and then stitches them together. However, that's all stuff William really does. William is the one who lures them all into one place and stitches them together, that being melting them down. But if William was to be anyone in the story, he'd be the burglar who kills the 5 children. So that part doesn't really work. The one I think covers this the best with an asterisk is Mike. Because A, he is not a completely evil character like William. Then there's the fact that he's responsible for Ennard being formed, which could be seen as the 5 children coming together. And the reason Ennard is made is so they could fit inside of Michael. And it is his persistence and willingness to work with Baby that makes Ennard exist, so you could argue he's the one stitching them together for that reason. And he'll later be the one managing and running the FNAF 6 pizzeria location, which could be the that night there was a knock at the door part. He is the one interacting with Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. And you only get the number 5 if you have Alteress: Elizabeth, Gabriel, Susie, Fritz, and Jeremy.
And of course, Vegeta Jr.
If you include Cassidy or the bite victim, you get 7. Hell, even if you remove the bite victim, you still end up with 6, which makes the Henry or William comparisons weird. The only issue with the Mike comparison is that Mike doesn't actively bring the characters gladness, but he does interact with them and does give them hope for escape, which could count. I do agree that Henry fits the gladness part better, but he doesn't fit the stitching them together part at all. In fact, it's implied that Henry actively finds the idea of souls inhabiting those suits repulsive, or at least is freaked out and terrified at the concept, which once again makes him responsible for them being stitched together even weirder under Molten MCI. And of course, Henry has no real analog to bringing them all to one location. Unless you really make it generalized by saying creating Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is making one place for them all to come together, it really doesn't work, because like I said, that would sound more like either the End to Sister location where all 5 souls are in one place in the scooping room / in Ennard, or William luring all 5 kids to the safe room. To me, Mike checks the boxes off the most, and that comes with the implication of Alter S. It's a story that's hard to fit with any one character cleanly, but I do think it has a place in Alter S, assuming it's about Molten MCI to begin with. And I think removing Cassidy from Molten Freddy adds to the narrative of Molten Freddy just a little bit more. With normal Molten MCI, you have Cassidy in Molten Freddy, which means they have a completely sentient leader figure who can make them do whatever. However, when you take Cassidy away from them, they're still the mentally broken and destroyed assemblage of parts with no real leader anymore. It makes the fact that they worked with Baby at all even more essential. They needed someone to look up to. They needed a Charlie or Cassidy to help them and guide them. It just happened that the only person there with that sentience and awareness abused and took advantage of the situation to escape, and ultimately had much more dark and sadistic motives. They're able to rebel against her and escape, but now they have no focus, no leader. You effectively have a bunch of kids with brain damage who are scattered and confused, struggling around for help, lashing out at anything in their way because it might be the person who hurt them. It might be the people who've hurt them at this point, because how many people have shocked them working in that bunker? They were just manipulated by Baby, and from their perspective, their killer got away. The whole reason they go to 6 is because they believe they're going to find William, or at least Henry's dialogue implies that. And what makes this even worse for them is that as their body melts more and more, they will become more and more mentally damaged and broken as they fall apart piece by piece by piece. I almost wonder if this is a consequence of having so many souls in one location. I don't know if the material can handle that much. It's the only thing I can think of to explain why they would be overheating specifically. They're Molten Freddy. We see them melting. That might imply that their existence in Molten Freddy is a ticking time bomb. Who knows when they're going to collapse and fully fall apart? It makes Happiest Day just that much more essential. It explains why they're broken prior to these events. Rather than Cassidy just not helping them, for whatever reason lacking the ability to help them, despite seemingly being able to do that with the bite victim, they can't. It makes getting Cassidy and Charlie to these end events even more essential. It makes the luring of all the characters even more essential. It makes Molten Freddy this almost feral, guideless beast that needs closure, rather than just another monster that happens to be made out of a bunch of kids. Is it possible for more lore to reveal this theory is wrong? Obviously. If normal Molten MCI is ever proven wrong, then Alter S is likely wrong too. If we ever learn for a fact that Henry absolutely knew about Golden Freddy's existence 100% in the exact way we did, then yeah, there is a solid argument against Alter S. However, we still have the missing endoskeleton in the furnace. There is still, to me, a completely justifiable explanation for the orphan story. There is still Cassidy interacting with Michael in the logbook, and there is still the damaged state of the kids leading into Happiest Day. While I'm not going to pretend this is the absolutely definitive take on Molten MCI and the timeline from 1 to 6 for the missing kids, I think there's a lot of really interesting story potential with this theory, and some interesting details that could suggest it. And then of course there's also the entire vengeful spirit to play with Cassidy for this theory and potential, where you have Cassidy hunting down William until the events of 6 where he's burned and vulnerable. And this could also play into a line the vengeful spirit has about how no matter how many times they burn us. They both implying they've been burned by multiple people, which could imply something with FNaF 3, the only other fire we know of for a fact. But the whole other topic that I already talked about a lot in the original version of this video. But like I said at the start of the video, I wanted to focus more on the Golden Freddy skew of the concept. With that said,